Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel here. So lately I've been doing a lot of theoretical build guides and content like that. I haven't been doing much hardware benchmarking or reviewing or anything like that. So I thought for today I would get back to a little bit of my more normal content and take a look at a card that is one of the classics when it comes to the AMD lineup. And I'm of course talking about the massive Vega64. Now, this card was a competitor to the GTX 1080 back in the day, and it's, as you can see, this one specifically has a massive shroud. This is the Asus ROG Strix shroud. It has a few LEDs there, some really nice heat sinks, 3-fan layout, and of course it has quite an impressive I/O for your inputs there for the displays. And apart from that, it's a very solid card. This is all metal, and this front is plastic. It has some lights there as well, and just a really impressive, really big, good looking card. Now of course the Asus Strix shroud isn't made just for AMD cards or just for the Vega. You get 1080s with that shroud, you get 1070s, I even think 1060s, and they've, I think, updated it for the 20 series NVIDIA cards and for the higher up cards, so to say, because we are of course talking about a 5, 6, 7-year-old card here. And same with the 1080 Ti. Even though it's an older card, it uses older architectures and technologies, it's still very relevant today, and it still performs quite Especially, well. Performs well when looking at 1080p gaming. It can push 2K as well, but it's not really made for that. And when these cards were released, 2K and 4K gaming were just getting sort of into the mainstream. It wasn't really a thing yet, so these cards aren't meant for that. But with that said, it's a very diverse card, and I think it's very underrated. I think it's very rare to an extent. I don't see a lot of people talking about it. I saw a few YouTubers looking at the Vega 56, which is the younger brother of this card, and it's a little bit weaker. So I thought today, I have this card. It's actually just been sold, so I'm going to, while I still can, make a video on it and benchmark it and see what it does in a modern system. The system I'm going to be using has a 5700X, 32 gigs or 400 megahertz DDR4 RAM, and of course it's going to run from an SSD. So it's going to be interesting to see what a 8 gig Vega 64 does in a system like that. So with that said, let's get into some gaming benchmarks and let's see how it does. Stay with me. Alright, let's get into the benchmarks here. So first off, as you can see, we are benchmarking The Witcher 3. Now, this is a game that has recently gotten a lot of fame again. It used to be a massive game, and now a lot of people are playing it again because of the next gen remake that they did. It's kind of like an update. I'm just going to turn the volume down a little bit. And yeah, it's a popular game. You can see the card in there. I think it looks really nice. It fills up the PC quite nicely. It's a bigger card. It's a 3-fan card, and it has 3 fans which aren't fast, but they spin fast enough to be audible. So you can hear the card. I'm not sure if you can hear it on the microphone here, but it is relatively audible when playing a game like this. And with that said, let's get into playing a bit of The Witcher 3. So the graphics are set to the high preset, no upscaling or dynamic resolution or anything like that. So this is native HD at high settings, and we are getting around 60 FPS. This is around what I would have expected. It's definitely a very playable experience. It looks fantastic, as you can see, and I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's a good result for an older card. This card was popular around the time The Witcher came out, The Witcher 3, but this remake just happened a couple months ago. So of course the remake is a lot more demanding than what the original game was, which was very demanding for its time. But getting into the stats here, the GPU is at around 65 degrees now, using around 98% of its power, and it's pulling around 130 to 170 watts. We are using 3 gigs of video memory, which isn't that much because this is an 8 gig card. And the CPU is using around 4% of its power. I'm not sure if that's accurate. And it is at 56 degrees and pulling around 60 watts. We are using around 11 gigs of RAM. And we are getting quite a smooth frame time there at 60 to 70 FPS. So definitely a very playable experience. It looks really nice. And yeah, I would definitely recommend getting a card like this secondhand if you want to play games like The Witcher, console equivalent sort of settings for modern consoles. So it looks fantastic, runs pretty well, and definitely a playable experience. Let's move on to the next benchmark. Alright, here for the next benchmark we have Fallout 4. Now, this is another game that was popular around the time that this card came out. And it's still a really good looking game. I just killed this robot. And it runs really well. As you can see, we are getting around 120 to 144 FPS. This is a high refresh rate screen. So I think that this will be a very good experience. It's a very sharp image, which I like. Just going to turn this down again. And yeah, right now it's nighttime obviously, so it'll be interesting to see the daytime. Maybe I'll fast forward to that, take a little sleep or something like that. But before I do that, let's get into the stats here. So GPU's at around 65 degrees, using around 85% of its power and pulling around 160 watts. Using around 4.5 gigs of video memory, which is about half of what this card has available. CPU is getting a little bit hotter at 60 degrees now. And this CPU isn't really doing much, pulling around 70 watts, using around 9 gigs of RAM, and you can see there, excellent frame time, excellent frame rate. So very happy with this result. Let's fast travel to the home base here, Sanctuary, and let's see what the frame rate does when it's daytime and when we're in a little bit of a different setting. Okay, so it is daytime, and we are in Sanctuary, which is a lot of houses and a lot of people and stuff like that. So frame rate is definitely taking a dip, but it's still around 100. It depends where you look. But this game is quite well optimized, and yeah, I think it looks fantastic. It's a very sharp image, and I really love the way it looks and feels. It's one of my favorite games to this day. And I think with a card like this, it's still modern enough to test. It feels great to play. Almost ran into my own trap there. And we are still getting around that 144. This is a game that does a lot of loading, so perhaps there will be some instances where the frame rate drops. But I'm going to see if I can find an enemy, and we'll see what the frame rate does when we get into a little bit of combat, because the frame rate is a little bit choppy. The frame time is pretty good though. I thought I saw something. So yeah, it's relatively consistent, but this card is quite power hungry and it is pulling a lot of power. I don't think I'm gonna find any enemies around here. This is one of my farms. I love this game. I love that you can just it's sort of like Minecraft for the wasteland. It's fantastic how you can build structures, and yeah, I just love the aesthetic and the visual appeal of it. It's just a really cool looking game. I'm just gonna run a little bit more, see if I can find something. There we go. I'm just gonna snipe that two-headed thing. Got him. So obviously that's not really much of a combat encounter, but at least we could shoot. Ragstag is what it's called. I think let's try and cause an explosion and see how the card handles that. because so far it's been really easy. When we load into new areas, there's a bit of a frame rate drop, but apart from that, I think the card hasn't been stressed much. There we go. Look at that, beautiful. Frame rate's pretty much the same. It's not really affecting it at all. So yeah, interesting result. Definitely playable. I would recommend a card like this for a game like this, and for a little bit of modern retro gaming, this will be a fantastic card. But definitely handles modern games as well. So with that said, let's move on to the next one. Let's do it. Okay, getting into another game now, and this one is called Horizon Zero Dawn. This is a more recent game. I think it came out like a couple years ago. I'm not really sure. But it's a fantastic looking game, and it has so much foliage. It's really difficult to render all of this foliage for a computer, for a graphics card. So it's a challenge, and this is running at 1080p native, no upscaling, no resolution magic, none of that. This is running at high. So yeah, it's getting around 70 FPS it seems for the most part, and yeah, again, this is a fantastic looking game. The frame time is pretty smooth, it's pretty consistent, using around 12.5 gigs of RAM, using around 6.5 gigs of video memory. So as we go into more recent titles, that video memory goes up, as games are now tuned to use more of that VRAM. And I'm not sure what that is. I haven't really played this game. And so yeah, this game is, I think this came out right around the launch of the PlayStation 5. I'm not exactly sure, but regardless of that, it is a really nice looking game. I really enjoy it. Like I said, I haven't played too much of it, but I think it's quite a fun game. And yeah, in terms of performance, we are stably getting around that 60 to 70 mark, so I'm pretty happy with that. Can you play recent modern games on a Vega64? Definitely. I mean, this is pulling close to 100 sometimes, and it's very smooth. Now, of course, you probably won't pair 32 gigs of RAM and a 5700X with a graphics card like this, but even if you don't, let's say you drop maybe 10 or so frames from using like maybe a 6-core CPU and 16 gigs of RAM, you're still getting 60 FPS minimum for everything we've tested so far. So I'm very happy with it. And with that said, let's move on to the next one. Let's do it. Alright, getting into the Doom Eternal benchmark, and this one is right off the bat running excellently. So this is running at HD. I think the field of view is pretty high, and the resolution is native HD, no upscaling. And we are running at Ultra. So I think you get Ultra and then Ultra Nightmare. So this is running at Ultra. GPU still around 60 degrees Celsius. It is being used 100%, 140 watts to 170 watts, so it's quite stable in terms of power pulling. Using around 6 gigs of video memory, so we can push this even higher, but if you want a high refresh rate like this, I'll recommend going with Ultra. I mean, they all look similar, they all look fantastic anyway, so yeah, this is what I would recommend. 144 FPS now, and yeah, obviously a really good result. The CPU still isn't doing much. I just think that these games don't really use a lot of CPU power. You know, some games will, like just something like perhaps the Hitman games, will things that have a lot of AI going on. You know, games like these, there's a lot happening, but it's a lot simpler, so to say. So yeah, I think this is running well. I don't really see what's happening. It's quite difficult to talk and play at the same time, but yeah, let's see how it goes. No, No. I'm gonna die. I don't have fuel. No. Using around 10 gigs of RAM. So we have, in this system, there's a lot. We have 32 gigs. Okay, I did die. But yeah, 6 gigs of video memory, 60 degrees on the CPU, 64 on the GPU, and the game looks fantastic, runs fantastic, and it's a lot of fun. This isn't the most demanding game in the world, but I think if you're just after a fun experience with a wide field of view, you'll have a good time playing games like these. And this is a more recent game as well, a more modern game. So this GPU is still very relevant in 2023, and it does really well. So with that said, let's move on to the next one. Let's do it. Okay, getting into the Red Dead Redemption 2 benchmark here. Now this game is also a little bit older now, and it was released around the time that this graphics card was popular, around the time of the 1080 and the that range of cards. And so I think it's a relevant test. Now this is a very outdated version of the game. I unfortunately don't have a newer one handy. So it will, recent updates to the game will have helped the frame rate a little bit, but yeah, this is just a sort of like a close estimation of what the card would get in the newest version of this game. And right now we are getting 55 FPS more or less. The frame time is quite decent. GPU, everything is sort of similar to what it was. We are using around 5 gigs of video memory and around 14 gigs of RAM. Now this is set to favor quality, but it's not set to ultra all the way. So this is a little bit of a disappointing result. I would have hoped to get at least 60 flat for the most part, especially because it's not even set to the ultra graphics. But it is still very playable, and of course it is still a very good looking game. There will be certain games that don't work as well with certain cards. That is just the way that computing is. But I do think that this is still a playable frame rate, and I think that when we get to Saint Etienne, the actual in-game sort of view, I think it'll reach 60 for the most part. But with a system like this, with a card like this, you would hope to get a little bit better. But I do think updating to the newest version of the game will alleviate some of those issues. So take this benchmark with a little bit of a pinch of salt. I don't think it is the most accurate one that we have done, but I think it gives you an idea of the performance. Now, this is a game that uses a lot of RAM. As you can see, it uses almost 14 gigs of RAM, and it can use a lot of video RAM as well if you give it the chance. So this more in-game sort of benchmark, getting around 60 as I predicted. It's a very good looking game, very sharp, lots of detail, and yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what this does when we get outside. It's going to have a little bit of a drop most probably, yeah, getting to the 55s. But I mean, this is a very playable frame rate. This is a console sort of equivalent frame rate, but these settings are higher than the console equivalent settings. So if you, for instance, want to compare this card to something like the GPU power of a Series S or a Series X, this is probably closer to the Series X, because this card can handle 4K gaming at 60 FPS, and for most games, and it definitely will play any game at 60 FPS at HD. So I think it's a good result. This is the first benchmark we've done where we haven't reached close to 100 like stably, but I still think this is a decent result, and it's very playable. And this is a notoriously difficult game to play, but I think the performance is a testament to how far the drivers have come for this card, because this card used to be quite unstable when it came out, used to have a lot of issues, but I think it is a really good result overall, and I think this card can definitely be used for high refresh rate, high performance gaming at HD specifically in 2023, and I think I'm pretty happy with the result. So this is the end of the Red Dead Redemption 2 benchmark. Yeah, it's a good result, and yeah, with that said, let's move on to the next one. Let's do it. Okay, getting into the second last benchmark here. This is Days Gone, and this is another game that came out more recently. It's a very modern game, again, has a lot of foliage, has a lot going on in terms of level design, world design, but this is running at high HD, no scaling, none of that, and I think it is doing quite well. It's at above 100 FPS so far for the most part. The GPU seems to have sort of maxed out at around 65 degrees Celsius, which is pretty acceptable. My petrol is gone. And so this seems like a fantastic result. Just looking at it here, 100 FPS on a very modern game using 11 gigs of RAM, 4 gigs of video memory. So most games, if you run them at high settings, seem to use around half of the video memory that this card has to offer, which is more than acceptable. I mean, even if you go to around 7 gigs, it'll still be, performant. It'll still run really well. I haven't played this game in a couple of months, so I've kind of forgotten what's going on. But yeah, I mean, this is a testament that this card will run modern games and it will run them well. I mean, look, this is at HD, but with a card like this, I think that's all you would need. But this does show me that even at 2K, if you run games on high graphics instead of very high or ultra, you'll be able to increase that resolution. So I'm pretty happy with this. I think it looks good, runs well. I think it's one of those games that a lot of people will probably be interested in. And I think this was a PlayStation exclusive in the beginning, if I remember correctly. But yeah, let's get into some combat and see what happens when we fight. The resolution, I mean, the frame rate is very stable, and it's even higher now. It's getting close to 144 at some instances. So yeah, very good result. I'm very happy with it. Looks fantastic, runs fantastic, and that frame time is very smooth as well. So yeah, you can expect to get around 100 FPS if you're playing modern games at high settings. So fantastic results. Let's move on to the last benchmark. Let's do it. Okay, getting into the last benchmark that we're going to do today for this card, the Vega64 8 gig Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Now, this is running at high HD resolution, 1080p, no upscaling, no resolution modifying, any of that. And we are getting around 100 FPS, which is pretty good, using around 6 gigs of video memory, 12 gigs of RAM. GPU and CPU tabs seem to have settled out, and they are just consistently around 60. The wattage for the GPU is reaching 180, which is quite high, but this GPU hasn't been tweaked. This is all stock settings in terms of overclocking. None of that has been done because I just wanted to get a good original benchmark. Still around the 100 FPS mark, so that shows me that we can probably push this game to ultra graphics if you're just aiming for that 60 FPS mark for gaming. And I just get the vibe with this card that this is a really good console equivalent card. So put this card in sort of like a PC that you've built up, maybe like something like a Ryzen 5 5500, 16 gigs of RAM, and this card. And of course you're gonna have to buy it second hand, but if you can find it, I think, you know, putting that up on your mantle and playing games with a remote with this card, I think will work really well. It's a really good card for 60 FPS max settings gaming. Because I mean, look at this result. This is a very modern game, and this is running at high graphics, and we are getting 150 FPS in this scene. Now it will drop down maybe to around 80 or so when we get into the actual crowd, but the results are astoundingly good, to be honest. Now Red Dead Redemption 2 didn't do too well, but apart from that, everything else did extremely well. And you also have to consider we aren't even using any resolution modification or anything like that. So if you could push this, if you have like a 4K TV and you just want to do 60 FPS gaming, I'm sure you could reach that with this card at high settings for the most part. So yeah, I'm extremely pleased with the results. I think it's a really good card for gaming in 2023, and these days you can get it for around $150 secondhand. So there isn't a lot of competition at that price point that will give you the same results that this does. So really good result. Let's do a new thing where we take a look at a graph with the average FPSs, and we'll see how this card did overall. Let's do it. Alright, so here we have a very basic chart, just a normal bar chart of the games. You'll see it's labeled Vega64 in 2023. All the games were played at HD, of course, and maximum of 200 FPS on the Y chart. On the X chart we have the games themselves. And it's a very basic chart. It's just to show the levels of performance, and these are the average FPS numbers. I'll probably do this a little bit better in the future, but you have to start somewhere. I'm just testing this out. Okay, starting with The Witcher 3. This is the second lowest performing game, but it's still a pretty good average FPS at 65 average. It is running at high on HD, and this is all native. There's no resolution scaling or fidelity effects or anything like that. This is all native, pure performance. Okay, secondly, Fallout 4. This is the second best performing game at 130 average, and this is a fantastic result, and it's a really good looking game still, and I think with mods and such you can make it look even better. So very happy with that, and that is running at ultra. Thirdly, the third lowest performer at a very good average FPS of 71 is Horizon Zero Dawn, running at high HD. Again, a new game, came out in the last couple years, visually appealing, visually performance hungry, and just a good result. And then we have one that really surprised me, Days Gone, at 120 FPS. Now this surprised me because I ran this at high and it got 120 average, which is a very good result. On my 3070 when playing at HD and running at high, running at ultra, so it is one step above, but when I'm running it at ultra it only gets around 150 to 160, so this is very close to that, and this is a much older card and these days much cheaper, of course. Then we have Doom Eternal, the best performing game, but that's no surprise. It's a game that's very well optimized, and even though it looks amazing and very vibrant and colorful, it performs really well. So really good result there, running at ultra. 135 average. If you want to reach that 144 hertz high refresh rate gaming sort of level, you can drop it down to high graphics. It looks similar, but if you want to go the other way and you're happy with around 100 FPS, maybe go to Ultra Nightmare with the graphics. And the slider was set to, I think, 120 FOV as well for the field of view. Then we have Red Dead Redemption 2. Now this was our worst performer, but this is also the most outdated game. For one, it's the oldest game that we tried, I think. No, Fallout 4 is probably the oldest, but it is the first version of the game. I haven't updated it at all, and so I think the numbers aren't reflective of what you would get. If I had to guess what you would get now on the updated version of the game, I would wager around 70 at high settings. And then lastly, Shadow of the Tomb Raider at a high, 110 average. I was surprised at this one as well. This is a really good result. I thought we were going to get around 80 maybe. But it did really well at high, so you could probably push that to very high and expect around 80 to 90 FPS. So that's it for the chart with the games. I think the graphics card did a lot better than what I anticipated in most of the games. Now, of course, we only tested a couple of games. I didn't test esports games or anything like that because it will destroy those games. There's no need to test them. Counter-Strike, Valorant, Rocket League, Rainbow Six, there's no need to test those because they're all going to reach above 200 FPS stable. So I wanted to go for something a little more AAA, a little more upper class graphics, a little bit more difficult to run, and so that's what I decided to go with these games. So overall very happy. I think it's a very good performer, and I think it's competitive against maybe even a 2060 these days. So you love to see it, very good, and definitely recommend it. Alright, so that's it for our look in 2023 at the Vega64 8GB variant. And this is of course the ROG Strix Asus version of the card, and I'm very surprised and very pleasantly surprised at the performance of the card. As you can see, the card also has some features like lighting using the Armory crate. I'm just going to move the camera so you can see it, and I think it looks quite nice. This is just a color cycle, but yeah, it's a very impressive card, and considering that these days you can get it for an extremely low price, I would definitely recommend going for this if you're looking for something that'll play games at HD or 2K or 4K at perhaps, you know, around 60 FPS for 4K, around 80 for 2K, and around 100 for 1K, depending on the settings of course, but for the most part at high settings. It's a very impressive card. I think it's not too expensive these days. You can get one for around $150. So I would definitely recommend it. I would go for it if this is something that you're looking at. And of course there are different variants to these cards. This is just the one that I have, the Asus one, but I like this one because I like the shroud and I like the options that the color has, the LEDs. So yeah, it's a good card. I think you wouldn't be disappointed if you went with it, and of course you can get into overclocking and all that kind of stuff, but it really isn't even necessary if you're just someone that wants to play games. It's not going to challenge your your new 700 XTs or your 4060s or anything like that. It's an older card. It uses older architecture, but I think for the price it'll be hard pressed to find something that'll perform better. And I think this is a card that got a little bit of a bad rep when it came out, but these days it performs really well, and I think it's a lot more stable now than it was when I got it as well. I think the driver updates have been really good, and I think that in 2023 this is a card you definitely could consider if this is something that you're looking at. So with that said, overall I'm very happy with the card, and I think you would enjoy it if you had one of these. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that you'll stick around, subscribe, like the video, chat to me in the comments. Let me know what you think. What kind of content do you want me to make? More of this kind of stuff, or more of those bold guides, or just a mixture as I'm trying to do it right now? Let me know what you think, your thoughts and opinions, and hopefully I will see you in the next one. Cheers.